I wasn't entirely sure what Cologne was going to be like. But after a few Kölsch beers and a walk through the old town, things began making a lot more sense. I started wondering whether this might actually be one of Germany's most underrated city breaks. Or had the Kölsch just gone to my head?
Welcome to Welsh's Travels. Today we're in Cologne. Can we see everything we want to see in just 32 hours? When most people think of Cologne, they think of the Cologne Cathedral. But is there anything else in the city that's worth visiting? Come along and let's find out.
After an early start and an hour and a half folded into a Ryanair seat, which seemed to be designed for people less than 5 foot tall, I landed in Cologne around midday, cleared passport control and headed for the train station conveniently located inside the airport. I got my first glimpse of Cologne's famous cathedral. You walk out the station and the cathedral is immediately there, towering over everything. I've seen quite a few cathedrals around Europe at this point, but this place is genuinely impressive. It's darker, moodier, and a lot more intimidating than I expected. Surprisingly, it was actually free to enter. There are a couple of areas that you need to pay to visit, but the main cathedral area is free. They started building the cathedral in 1248, and after a few delays along the way, finally finished it over 600 years later. It also survived the Second World War, despite large parts of Cologne being destroyed around it. I managed to get a table at Früh am Dom somehow, which felt like a minor achievement considering how packed it was.
Thank you.
The diet starts tomorrow. In Cologne, Kölsch is served in these small glasses. The waiters then keep bringing you beers automatically when your glass is empty until you place a coaster on top of your glass. They mark the coaster each time and tally up the total at the end.
Thank you.
There is even a gift shop next door where you can buy Früh branded sandals, t-shirts, underwear, bucket hats, or even dog treats. I stayed at the Motel 1 Cologne Altstadt for €88, which was very good value considering it was only about a 10-minute walk from the old town. Every Motel 1 room in Europe basically looks identical, so there's not much to show. But they're usually modern and clean, have a good bar area, and seem better than the price suggests. I decided to walk along the Rhine to take a look at Cologne's famous Kranhäuser, or crane buildings. They were built as part of the city's old harbour redevelopment and are designed to resemble the industrial cranes that used to operate here. I'm not entirely sure the camera captures the scale of them properly, but standing underneath them is quite impressive. The plan now is to walk through the old town, cross over the Hohenzollern Bridge, better known as Cologne's Love Lock Bridge, and then head up to the Köln Triangle viewpoint for a panoramic view across the city. On a nice day, the atmosphere along the Rhine is very relaxed, with people having picnics by the river or settling into one of the many pubs for a beer in the sun. Unlike some old towns that feel a bit like open-air museums, mostly for the benefit of tourists, Cologne still feels properly lived in by locals. Of course, there are tourists everywhere, but it doesn't feel completely manufactured. Although Cologne's old town looks historic, a lot of it had to be rebuilt after the Second World War, when around 90% of the city centre was destroyed during bombing. Arriving at the Hohenzollern Bridge, I knew there'd be a few love locks here, but I wasn't expecting quite this many. The bridge itself dates back to the early 1900s, while the love lock tradition only started around 2008, with couples attaching padlocks before throwing the keys into the Rhine below. There are now estimated to be well over 500,000 of them on the bridge. Once over the bridge, I made my way towards the Cologne Triangle viewpoint, but it was closed due to staff being off sick. I've never come across that excuse before at a major tourist attraction. All this walking is making me thirsty. Time for a Kölsch?
Now for the Kölsch beer, you can choose between 200 mils or a 10-litre barrel. They're the two size options.
That evening, I'd booked a table for one at Gaffel am Dom, which turned out to be a seat awkwardly attached to a family of 4. For my starter, I ordered Mettbrötchen, which is essentially raw pork and onion served on bread. Not necessarily something that sounds appealing, but surprisingly delicious. For the main, I had pork schnitzel with blood sausage and apples. The schnitzel here was much thicker than the ones I had recently in Austria. Personally, I prefer the thinner version. There's something very enjoyable about aimlessly walking through a German old town after a few Kölsch beers. The weather probably should have slightly ruined the evening. If anything, it improved it. The squares around the old town are lined with pubs and restaurants, and even on a wet evening, the atmosphere was still really good. After a long day exploring Cologne, and probably one Kölsch too many, I think it's time to call it a night.
Well, it's Sunday morning and we're heading towards the Chocolate Museum. I was in two minds about whether to go to the Chocolate Museum because on one hand I'm thinking it might be a bit of a tourist trap. On the other hand, it is very popular here, so I thought I'd go in with an open mind and give it a go. And here is the Chocolate Museum. As always, tickets are timed entry and cost around about €18 for an adult. I think it's around about €10 for a child.
After receiving a complimentary Lindt chocolate on entry, which lasted roughly 3 seconds, the Chocolate Museum begins with a small tropical greenhouse containing cacao and papaya plants. It then moves into exhibits covering the darker history of the cacao trade, including exploitation and labour practices that, unfortunately, still exist in parts of the industry today. One of the best parts of the museum is the working production line, where you can watch chocolate being made from start to finish. You can even push a button and the robot will deliver a fresh bar of chocolate to try. It'd be rude not to try some wafer dipped in chocolate.
Thank you.
The museum also contains chocolate-related artefacts dating back over 3,000 years, alongside old adverts, packaging and production equipment showing how chocolate evolved over the years. The Chocolate Museum is worth visiting if you like chocolate and are interested in the history, although I do think it's slightly overpriced for what it is.
So we're now heading over to the old city gates, which were built in the 13th century. So let's go over there now and take a look. Now, Cologne suffered quite a lot of damage during World War II, but there are still a few historic sites still remaining. Behind me is a medieval tower, which I think is pronounced Bayern Turm. I don't know a lot about this tower, but it looks like it has been renovated at various points in its history. It looks like it may have suffered quite a bit of damage during World War II.
Just a few minutes past the Kranhäusers, and suddenly most of the tourists had disappeared. I wasn't entirely sure whether to turn back or just keep walking. I stumbled across a Sunday morning flea market next to the Rhine. The market seemed to go on for about a kilometre along the river, but I was starting to get hungry. I found a stall selling sausages, chips and currywurst, and there was no chance I was walking past without giving the currywurst a try. It ended up being one of the best currywursts I've had, and eating it next to the Rhine on a Sunday morning, it's a pretty hard combination to beat. After the market, I carried on walking towards Cologne's old city gates, although it wasn't long before I got distracted again.
This is such a strange place. It looks like an abandoned fort, but there's also a heap of rubbish lying around. There's lots of graffiti, and for some reason, a basketball court right in the middle. It's a bit like a graveyard for playgrounds.
I later found out this wasn't actually an abandoned junkyard, but the Bauspielplatz Friedenspark. It's basically a supervised adventure playground where children can build things, use tools, and climb around old materials and structures. Along the way, I passed through what looked like quite an affluent neighbourhood with some impressive buildings, although the lower levels seemed to be almost completely covered in graffiti.
And yes, I'm still on my way to the city gates, I haven't forgotten. And there's the city gates in the background.
Cologne's medieval city gates were originally built as part of the huge defensive wall surrounding the city in the 12th and 13th centuries. It's about 20 minutes from here back to the old town, but if you want to work off some beer and chocolate, it's worth a look. Along the way, I stopped at the Stolwerk Mädchen statue, which honours the women who worked at Cologne's famous chocolate factory in the late 1800s, mostly because factories could pay them less than men. I couldn't really come to Cologne without walking past the Farina shop, which is where the world's first eau de Cologne was created back in the 1700s. So far, I'd tried both Früh and Gaffel Kölsch, but before heading to the airport, I also wanted to try a Peters Kölsch. I remembered walking past Peters Brauhaus the night before, so I headed back into the old town for one final beer and some lunch. I couldn't leave without trying some more Mettbrötchen. Who doesn't like raw pork on bread? You can't beat a German sausage and potato salad. Of the three Brauhauses, Früh probably had the best atmosphere, along with the trademark gruff waiters. Gaffel and Dom felt a bit more modern, and their food was probably the best overall. Whereas Peters seemed more traditional and noticeably more local. Kölsch seems to have slightly different effects on different people. With a few hours left before my flight, I had a final wander around Cologne before catching the train to the airport. When I first arrived in Cologne, I honestly wasn't sure if there'd be much to do. I'd thought it might end up being one of those cities where you look at the cathedral for an hour, have a walk around, and then run out of things fairly quickly. But over the 32 hours I spent here, the city really grew on me. What I liked most was that Cologne still feels like a real city, rather than somewhere designed entirely around tourists. There are obviously touristy areas, especially around the cathedral and Old Town, but you still get the sense that locals genuinely visit the city centre as well. Despite the damage Cologne suffered during the Second World War, there's still plenty of history here, from the cathedral to the old city gates. The real highlights were the Old Town, the atmosphere along the Rhine, and of course, the Kölsch. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe and share. Stay tuned for my next adventure as we take a 2-night mini cruise from Newcastle to Amsterdam with DFDS ferries.